Hello and welcome to the Nevada Historical Society. My name is Sherry and I am the curator of manuscripts here at the Nevada Historical Society. Did you know we're the oldest museum here in the state, going back to 1904? We've moved around a few times, and our latest location since 1968 is on the UNR campus across from the Fleshman Planetarium. If you've ever been to our museum, maybe you've been led by one of our educational docents. They'll give wonderful stories about different parts of Nevada's history. Can you tell me what one of your favorite artifacts that you saw while on your trip? I know for me, it's our two-headed calf. Of course, our Datsalali and our firearms, but wonderful pieces in our galleries. What we're going to see today is one of our educational docents will be giving you a tour on a specific gallery and a topic of Nevada history. We hope you enjoy this video and come back to our website to watch the other videos that will be on there. And we hope to see you soon in person.
Hello, I'm Linda.
And I'm Pam.
And we are docents at the Nevada Historical Society. And we're here today to talk to you about the mountain men as explorers in the American West of Nevada. 200 years ago, there was no Nevada. It wasn't even a state or territory, and there were no maps of the area. Imagine having to find your way around or over the top of all those mountains. Would you use the valleys? Would you look for the rivers and follow them like a road? Think about it. I want you to imagine yourself in Nevada 200 years ago, searching for the mysterious San Buenaventura River. You want to catch or trap beaver, which you can exchange or trade at the rendezvous. You need water to survive and to find the beaver, but where do you go? There are no maps. No one, except the Native Americans, are living here, and you must learn their language or a way to communicate with them. You must cross their lands, and they look strange and different to you, as you do to them. How do you think these native people first viewed the mountain men? We are going to discuss some of these when we meet these amazing adventurers, the mountain men as early explorers of Nevada.
First up, Jedediah Strong Smith. For Jed Smith, trapping was a means to his greatest love, exploration. In his 8 short years of mountaineering, he traversed across more unknown wilderness than any of his contemporaries until he died at the hands of the Comanche Indians. In 1826, Jed left the Cache Valley Rendezvous. Oh, what's a rendezvous? It's a gathering that occurred every year from 1825 to 1840 in the Rocky Mountains. At the rendezvous, trappers, traders, fur companies, and Native Americans gathered to buy and sell beaver pelts and other trade items and supplies for the coming winter. They also visited with friends, played music and games, and generally took a break from the hard work of trapping. Anyway, Smith headed south with a party of 15 men traveling down the Virgin River to the Colorado River to the Mojave Indian villages, and west across the Mojave Desert and the San Bernardino Mountains to the Mexican mission of San Gabriel. From there, they traveled north along the west flank of the Sierra Nevada. He and his men trapped beaver while looking for a route across the mountains. They decided to leave most of his men to camp on the Stanislaus River, while he and 2 men would go east across the snowbound Sierra to the 1827 rendezvous at Bear Lake in Utah Territory. Thus, he's credited with being the first Euro-American to cross the Great Basin. Jed kept really good records and drew maps that clarified the geography. He almost never drank alcohol, never used tobacco, never boasted, rarely indulged in jokes or relaxed his severe manner. He was a stern Methodist, engaged in prayer, meditation, and constant study of the Bible. There are lots of fun, and a little gory, stories about Jedediah Smith. On one of his trips, he and his men were out of water and near dying from thirst. Smith convinced the two men with him to let him bury them in the ground up to their necks. He convinced them that this would preserve the moisture in their bodies while he would continue to search for water. He found water and returned and saved his men. Another time, Smith was attacked by a grizzly bear who tore off his ear and nearly the whole side of his face. He ordered one of his men, Jim Kleinman, to fetch a needle and thread and sew it back on. Jim wasn't too happy about doing it, but do it he did. It is said that is why there are so few pictures of Jedediah Smith, this being the only one that I know of, and he let his hair grow to cover his face.
James Pearson Beckwith, or Jim Beckwith, born in Virginia, the son of a white father and a slave mother. In the fall of 1824, Jim answered a William Ashley ad for men to join the fur trapping expedition to the Rocky Mountains. At one time he trapped with Jedediah Smith, then later with Robert Campbell, another well-known trapper. He was a great storyteller and told a story of running for 95 miles in one day while being chased by Blackfeet, and earned the nickname Gaudy Liar. He left fur trapping and was adopted by a Crow tribe, was made a chief and married the daughter of a tribal leader. While searching for gold in 1851, he explored the Sierra Mountains between the Middle Fork of the Feather River and the Truckee, and decided the geography would allow for an excellent wagon route for emigrants to Northern California. Beckwith set up a store and saloon there and sought out wagon trains to pass this way. Today, this area is known as Beckwith Pass. A book on his life published in 1856 is entitled The Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwith, Mountaineer, Scout and Pioneer, and Chief of the Crow Nation of Indians.
I'm sure you've all heard of Ogden, Utah. Well, it was named for this man, Peter Skeen Ogden. He worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, an English fur company, and in September 1828, Peter Ogden led an expedition, a brigade, out of Fort Nez Perce on the Columbia River, and they traveled south in search of that Buenaventura River that we talked about earlier. The hope was that this river flowed from the Great Salt Lake to San Francisco. While his men went upstream to trap beaver, he traveled downstream and found that the river flowed into a lake without an outlet. Since this could not be the Buenaventura, he named it the Unknown River. Even though it's not mentioned in any of his journals, Ogden is credited with calling the river Mary's River. We don't really know why Mary, but it was known as Mary's River to trappers for several years. Trapping was quite successful. In his diary, he makes a note that his men were catching 130 beaver a day, and they continued east, spending the harsh winter months in a valley east of the Salt Lake, a valley now known as Ogden's Hole. The brigade returned to the Unknown River in the spring of 1829, but trapping was not as good this time. By May, they had reached the terminus of the river, where it flowed through a swamp and emptied into a flat basin. At this point, they encountered hostile Native Americans. Provisions were running low, and the horses were exhausted. The men had had enough, and so they returned to Fort Nez Perce, which is in present-day Washington State.
John C. Fremont. Neither a fur trapper nor a mountain man, but as a topographer of much of the West, Fremont gave names to many areas. He was possibly the first Euro-American to see and name Pyramid Lake. He named the Truckee first the Salmon Trout River. He gave the area that encompasses most of modern Nevada, parts of Utah, Idaho, and California, the Great Basin. Fremont was the first to recognize that the Great Basin was a land of interior drainage. In 1845, with authority as a military officer, he dubbed the river that was known as Mary's River, the highway to the west, the Humboldt River, after a renowned German naturalist, Alexander von Humboldt, who never even saw the river. We may note that in February 1843, he first saw Lake Tahoe and left it nameless, perhaps because he saw it in a snowstorm. It was later labelled Mountain Lake in 1845.
This is Joseph Walker, and when it came to mastery of the mountain man craft, few outdid Joseph R. Walker. Born in Tennessee, he learned the frontiersman arts early and eventually gravitated still further west. He looked like what we think of as a mountain man. Weighing over 200 pounds and standing 6 feet 4 inches, this heavily bearded giant typified the physical strength, endurance, and fortitude, as well as the rootlessness and individualism that was almost a requirement for this lifestyle. Similar to Jed Smith, Walker hardly ever got drunk, he wasn't boastful, and he didn't relax his self-control. Also, like Jed Smith, trapping provided Walker the means to find his true calling, exploring unsettled regions. In 1830, when he met Benjamin Bonneville, he got the opportunity to explore the American West. In 1833, Bonneville sent Walker in command of a party to the Great Salt Lake to find an overland route to California. Exploring the land west of Salt Lake, he determined, just as Ogden had, that there was no Buenaventura River, but stumbled on the only viable passage through the bleak desert and mountains. Can anyone guess what it was? Yep, Mary's River. A gentleman named Zenas Leonard, who traveled with Walker as a clerk, described the route along Mary's River this way: to which we gave the name Barren River, a name we thought quite appropriate, as the country, natives, and everything belonging to it deserves that name. The name seemed right to many of the trappers and travelers along the Humboldt. One of the trappers, Joseph Smith, described the destitute existence on that river this way: "I've held my hands in an anthill until they were covered with ants, then greedily licked them off. I've taken the soles off my moccasins, crisped them in the fire, and eaten them." Can you imagine eating your shoes? They followed the river to the Humboldt Sink, then to present-day Genoa, and ascended the Sierra Nevada by traveling the west fork of the Carson River. After wandering to find a route down the western slope and suffering severe hardships, they found their way to the Stanislaus River. They may have been the first Euro-Americans to see the Yosemite Valley. Walker and his party of 52 men traveled down the Central Valley of California, crossing back over the Sierra Nevada, and in the spring 1834 were guided by Native Americans and made their way up the Kern River through a portal now called Walker Pass. They made their way north to the Humboldt Sink and returned via the previous route, this time resulting in a deadly encounter with the Paiutes, killing 14 of them. In 1840, Walker and a band of followers made a north to south crossing of the Great Basin, following Jed Smith's route to the Virgin River, and then descended to the Colorado River, crossing the Mojave and to the current LA area, where he sold 417 pounds of beaver pelts. In 1843, he hired on to guide a wagon train bound for California.
Christopher Houston Carson, Kit Carson. Kit Carson commanded respect of his peers as a proficient trapper, courageous fighter, and dependable teammate. He was a true free trapper and never stayed with one company or troop for very long. He went where he wanted, and as a result, he was one of the most knowledgeable of the North Rockies, Great Salt Lake, Humboldt Corridor, and Snake River, and the North, Middle, and South Parks of the South Rockies. In the fall of 1841, with the fur trade era ending, he was seeking a new job. He was on a steamer up the Missouri when he met Lieutenant John C. Fremont, Corps of Topographical Engineers, United States Army. This union of mountain man with government explorer would bear vitally on the opening of the American West. In his journal, John Fremont would call Carson the greatest scout of all. We know of him through the naming of Carson City and the Carson River. As an example of his skill, on one occasion, only Kit Carson had the stamina to climb a mountain to take cartographic readings. In the 1840s, as the numbers of immigrants to the West grew, most took care to hire mountain men as guides, captains, pilots, or whatever title they gave them. But beside guiding, even more importantly, the mountain men taught greenhorns how to get across the continent, how to kindle a fire and cook over it, how to pull a mule or a wagon, how to ford a river, how to secure the wagons and stock at night, how to dress and kill a bison, and how to get along with the Native Americans. As mountain men and fur trappers, they wrote a chapter of history, and as explorers and guides, they wrote another one. Today, we still use the pathways the mountain men trod, many of which were first used by Native Americans. Our railroads and highways are the trails they first walked and rode. The mountain men explored the West, and their information, in the form of sketches, diaries, and letters, was used by cartographers to produce the first published maps of the region. In the 1840s and 1850s, government map-making expeditions were led through the West by these guides and helped formulate United States policy and aided the future planning of railroads, telegraph, and pony express routes. Gold miners, religious freedom seekers, and pioneers all took advantage of their expertise. The mapping of waterways, such as the Humboldt and Carson rivers, enabled irrigation for ranchers, farmers, miners, and settlers, and set the scene for continuing environmental and water rights issues to this day.